This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created. To listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Andy Crocker, who is an aerospace executive with 3 decades of experience building high-performance teams and leading ambitious projects, including NASA's Human Landing System. He holds degrees in engineering, humanities, management, and leadership. His multidisciplinary educational background and diverse career shaped his unique perspective that has led him to write a book called The Unconditionals, in which he reveals the foundational values that help readers realize their greatest personal and professional fulfillment. So, Andy, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks, Steve. I'm glad to be on.
So, just give us a little context here. We see that you have multiple degrees and have a lot of experience, but just kind of let's start off by telling us kind of where you grew up and how you got interested in aerospace and how you got into this pretty amazing career.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I grew up in the southeast part of the US and um, just grew up enjoying math and science. So early on, I knew I wanted to do some career in science or engineering, but really it was a project in 8th grade, a science project on space stations. I just happened to choose space stations. I really loved it and decided that was a career I wanted to go into, aerospace. And actually really got inspired to want to be an astronaut. So I pursued that as a career, and my major in college was aerospace engineering. Um, but also really have always enjoyed humanities and really became interested in leadership early on. So, as you said, I've pursued degrees in those things as well, certifications and ongoing, adult education things, especially related to leadership. But it's really allowed me to have a fulfilling career in aerospace. And as you said, 3 decades of lots of different projects from defense to civil, working for NASA and commercial space, including in the last 5 years or so, working on the Human Landing System, which really has been one of my most exciting projects. But it's been a great career, and lately I've also been trying to um, take what I've learned, lessons I've learned, particularly about leadership and values-based leadership, and share those with other people.
And that's kind of the interesting piece, right? Because as an engineer and somebody who deals a lot in science and technology and things, you don't always think of leadership and people skills and things like that you just mentioned. So why have an interest in that? Why did you see that you needed to expand in that area?
I've always been interested in it. Somewhat interestingly, I'm the first person in my family, either side of my family, really to be heavily interested in science and engineering. Most of my family has been either in ministry or humanities or other areas that they've pursued in their careers. So the difference for me was the science and engineering, and humanities was more kind of what the people I grew up with did more often. But I liked both, but I really wanted to do engineering as a career, and I'm glad I did that. But I've really come to believe that having an interest and having a real understanding of both is critical. We talk about the hard skills and the soft skills in our careers, and that clearly is something a lot of people believe is important. But I think particularly for technically minded folks, we really have to understand what about those soft skills and what the humanities can offer that help us to be better workers, better people, and better leaders.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think for those that are watching on video, I'm holding up your book here, The Unconditionals, which you chose to write a book on the humanities side. So it's
Right.
very interesting. A great book, by the way.
Thank you.
Just in the unconditionals, you talk about that, there are these five timeless values to live without limits. And those five values are love, gratitude, integrity, accountability, and endeavor. And I thought it was interesting when the preface of the book, you were very vulnerable. And I like the fact that you came out in the preface and basically said, look, you may think that, I'm an expert in these areas, that's why I'm writing about it, but I'm really not. I'm just a human being and we all make mistakes and we all try and strive for certain things, but we're certainly not experts at it. And I thought that was a unique and kind of a breath of fresh air approach because a lot of times people write books and you just automatically, oh, well, they're an expert in this area. And so you say, I'm not, but I understand it, I appreciate it. And so just tell us why you chose to be so vulnerable right out of the gate.
Well, there were two main reasons. One is I didn't want people to look at the book and say, this guy has no credibility. Why should I read this book? I wanted to be very transparent about, look, I'm writing about my life, the lessons I've learned, the things not only that I've lived personally, but have read about, but putting all that together into what I feel like really makes a difference in people's lives, what has made a difference in my life, and what I think can make a difference in people's lives. And then the second part of the vulnerability is, as you saw in the preface, talking about some of what was the springboard for sort of a failure or certainly a learning experience for me that caused me to step back in my career and think about what do I want to do next. And that really led me to thinking about what do I think is important in life, and then I focused on the values. So all of that, I wanted to be very clear with the reader that this is how I came to this point in writing this book, and also this is what I'm bringing to the table. Yes, I'm not a PhD in psychology or philosophy, but I'm bringing things to the table that I think are interesting enough to want to read the book.
Well, it's refreshing. I mean, it's basically says, this is what I've learned, this is what I've experienced, and sometimes that's better than all the academic research oriented things.
Right, right, right.
So,
Certainly stories, personal stories make a big difference. Yes.
yeah, and starting out in relation to that, you tell a great story right out of the gate as well, where you had this human landing system that you've been working on for a long time, which, you can explain that a little bit to those that may, that means you're going to land on the moon
Right.
and have a vehicle to do that. But you're going up, you decide you're running a small company and you're gonna go against the big shots. So you're going against Elon Musk and in SpaceX, and then you're going also against Jeff Bezos in Blue Origin, which are two pretty heavy hitters, and you're trying to bid against them. So tell us a little bit about that story and how you weren't intimidated, you just went for it.
Right. It's going for landing people on the moon is kind of a career defining opportunity or project for aerospace engineers, especially for folks like myself who really are passionate about human space exploration. So, when in late 2018, NASA announced that it was really going to invest again and try to get people back to the moon, specifically get Americans back to the moon and really establish a longer term presence on the moon and eventually go to Mars. Um, I got excited about it, and I was able to convince the folks in my company to get excited about it. And the unique thing about that opportunity at that time is no one really had done anything about it in 50 years. NASA had talked about going back since the Apollo program, and there had been a few studies over the previous few decades, but really no serious investment. So the playing field was pretty level. And pretty quickly, it turned into something that NASA was leaning heavily on commercial companies to drive. So the company I was with decided to jump in, and we were fairly successful in getting to the point where it was really a competition between my company, the company I worked for, and SpaceX and Blue Origin, as you said, which at the time when people found out who was in the running for the opportunity, nobody knew who we were. So it was a great opportunity to kind of be in the limelight, be able to have that great opportunity. And we did really spend a lot of time and invested a lot of money and resources in developing a great concept and developing a great team. So the project, you know, independent of the outcome, the project itself was really fun, uh, extremely fulfilling, and just a great opportunity to learn about leadership, learn about team building, learn about um, things to do to make the team go well, and then eventually learn about failure. Because as it turned out, we had really two shots. One, the first selection that NASA made, and they selected SpaceX. And then they turned around and said, we really feel like we need a backup. So we were in the running again, this time just against Blue Origin. And again, we fell short. We weren't selected. So it was a great opportunity for a fantastic project that I wouldn't trade for anything, nor do I think any of the folks who were part of the team would. But we still fell short of the goal. And
Well, and as the story goes, the contract, you couldn't compete because both those those other two people put in what $3 billion of investment money into the project as part of the bid, which your company just didn't have the resources to do.
couldn't do what wouldn't do it. Yeah, we were a publicly traded firm at that time, and just a different operating model, different business model than either of those companies at the time. So yeah, it made it um, challenging in ways that we couldn't control, and that's a great lesson. There are certain things you can control and things you can't, and you do the best with the things that you can have an impact on. What really what that really sparked for me, the whole project and getting to the point of losing and realizing we wouldn't have another opportunity, was it forced me to step back and ask myself the question, what do I want to do next? This was kind of a career defining project, and you can't help but imagine yourself doing this for the rest of your career, sending people to the moon and continuing to do that for the rest of your career. When it falls short, it's just natural to question, what do you want to do? And for me, it was sort of questioning, what are what's really important. What do I want to do next? And it really came to focus me on values and the values that I think are important for myself, but also for my children, and then in general, I think are important for people in general, in leadership roles and on the job and just in relationships and in general.
Did it feel unfair? I mean, let's be real. I mean, they just bought the contract basically. And so, in the administration at the time, I think, that spoke to them, you're gonna, we're gonna put all this money in, therefore you get the contract, which, for you and your smaller firm, that must have felt horribly unfair.
I think, yeah, unfairness certainly it comes to mind. Um, I think in just about every situation in business, there are going to be elements of disadvantages that, again, you can't control, and many times that seems unfair. But it's part of the situation, part of the reality, and you have to get to the point where move past that and say, we're either going to succeed based on being superior in all the other things, or we're not. And if we don't, then we have to live with that. But we're going to give it our best shot. So I think we all walked away from it feeling like um, we did the things we could do. We gave it a really great shot. We learned a ton, and the company is still benefiting from the things that we learned and did at the time. But it's also a life lesson that sometimes things are seemingly unfair, and you can't change it, and the decisions are made, and you move on.
Well, we'll explore that a little bit deeper here, but I am curious, why has it taken so long for us to get back, with a human landing system on the moon? I mean, it seems like we had a lot of momentum and everyone was excited, and then nothing. We obviously have the technology to do it. Why is it taking so long?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, and I know that there are a lot of different opinions, but again, I do have the background, and The last time we landed on the moon with people was 3 months after I was born, and I'm 53 years old. So, it really does make you wonder what happened. I think there are a few major factors. One is when we did it back in the 60s and early 70s, um, it was pushing the limits, and the technology was very much government driven, government funded. It was very, very expensive. NASA had a much bigger fraction of the budget in those times, and all of that obviously was driven politically. It was driven by a race, much more about prestige nationally, and sort of establishing that we're the dominant force in the world as a country. And once we established that, we sort of washed our hands of the issue because one, it continued to be very, very expensive, but two, there were other political challenges to take on. So we moved away from that. In the meantime, I think we NASA as a space agency, as a nation where we really wanted to try to move things forward, was not so much in planetary research, but trying to make it easier and cheaper and safer to get people into space. And great strides were made there with the space shuttle. And then more recently, in the last 15 years, with commercial space, really finally having the technology commercially to go do very important, very challenging things. And then I think lately, it's part of it is again a political issue that China has demonstrated some things on the moon that haven't been done. Frankly, they've landed on the far side of the moon with a lander, not manned, but with a lander. And no other country has done that successfully. And it has become clear that China plans to land people on the moon. And there's a real concern that the moon could become a high ground, literally uh, defensive or offensive purposes. And so there has become a political push again to get people back to the moon. So it's a combination of factors, but so much of it really is politics, and historically it's been so expensive to do. It's still expensive, but relative to what it was 60 years ago, it's much more achievable.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So now that you've kind of had this, I don't know if you call it a career change, but at least a different way of thinking,
Mhm.
the couple things caught my eye in the book, and one of the things you said was that the search for meaning is in my bones. So you prefaced that a little bit earlier, and then you also said, I often thought of tasks before people, which those of us in the leadership ranks say, oh yeah, that you got to change that. So those are two statements that kind of caught my eye. So speak to those a
Mhm.
little bit.
Sure. Yeah, thinking about meaning and really what's important has always been something that I've been interested in and kind of has been around me. As I said, some members of my family have been in the ministry, and so thinking about meaning from a religious perspective, and then when you get to college, obviously you question a lot of your childhood beliefs and learn a lot about other things going on around the world that you didn't know. And so I've always been and continue to be very interested in um, meaning philosophically, from a spiritual perspective, and then as it pertains to just practical daily life. What am I doing with my skills, with my talents, with my interests in a career that really feels like I'm having a positive impact on the things and the people around me. So those have always been important. And then when you step back, having that career pivot kind of experience, and having an opportunity to step back, those tend to be the moments when you really think about meaning and think about meaning for your own life. And for me, it was in part, what do I want to do next, and how do I want to continue to um, feel like I'm having a positive impact, have meaningful impact on the people and the things around me. And then, as you said about tasks versus people, Uh, Particularly, I think it's something that technical, scientifically or engineering minded people are vulnerable to is being so task focused and not thinking about the people aspect. And certainly, I've fallen prey to that. But um, as I've thought about values throughout my career, and then in particular in the last few years writing the book and talking about it, it's just reinforced for me that the tasks really happen because of the people, and uh, everything we do is for people, by people, with people, and that's really been reinforced for me as I've written the book and then learned more after I've written it and talked about it.
Yeah, that's well said. Another thing that I pulled out of here was, you talk about the lack of control prevents us from holding to our principles. So, when we let those external factors control our feelings, our behaviors, our actions, we violate the changeless nature of those principles. And so, and then we can't follow them. So, talk a little bit about that because there's always the pressures to do things differently or let other factors get us off track.
Right. Yeah, uncertainty and lack of control, I think, are two of the biggest drivers um, for people to do things differently than they would in a normal situation. And I guess put a different way, for us to make mistakes. When we deal with uncertainty and we deal with a lack of control, we start to try to find ways to take control back and to create certainty where there isn't any, and many times it causes us to um, uh, violate our values. That's really what um, I ended up focusing the book on, and it was late in the process of writing the book. I decided fairly early about the values that I thought were important, but it was only late in the process when I realized what I was really getting to, the meat of it, was that these values have to be unconditional. And that's why I titled the book The Unconditional. That is, they have to be the values that are constant no matter what the situation, despite uncertainty, despite a lack of control. We have to have these values and maintain our focus on those in every situation, despite the circumstances. So that's why I think these values are so important for leaders. Is we know we're going to experience uncertainty and lack of control, and having these values as our backbone or our operating system really uh, gives us, I guess, a peace or a comfort that if we can rely on our values, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, we can stick with those.
Yeah. The way the book is constructed too, I appreciate in each chapter is organized and talking about the value and explaining it and what your feelings about it. But then there's always a section of what it is section, and then there's why it matters section, and where do we go wrong section, and answers and timeless wisdom section, and and how to live by it. So it was really good because I thought it took some of those things that we all I think can agree on, but sometimes can feel a little vague and a little abstract. But
Right.
then you put them into categories as I just described, which I think help us all see that. So I thought that was well done.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that these five values, when you say the words, at least a few of them, if not all of them, can seem very overused or can feel like, yeah, those are the same things that everybody talks about. But hopefully, as you get into those sections and really dig into where we go wrong in particular, and some of the ways that we can really live out these values, you can see that there's more to it. There's more that we really need to think about as we try to incorporate these values unconditionally in our lives.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is, the word integrity. I think pretty much everybody kind of knows what that means, but yet I
Mhm.
would I would argue that probably every company in the nation one of their core values is integrity. As a matter of fact, Enron, one of theirs was integrity.
Hmm.
But what that means and how that works is a whole different thing to people. You talk about, you said that integrity is essential to living a fulfilled life. And so, what exactly does integrity mean? And I think, in the book you did a good job of that. And you do use a lot of good stories about what that means. So tell us the Andy Roddick story because I love that.
Yeah, so I love sports, all different sports, but tennis is one I played some in high school and enjoy watching. And Andy Roddick was really in his prime when I was in college and then just out of college. I had the opportunity to see him play once in a tournament in Atlanta, and he's one of those athletes that I think people you either love him or you hate him. He played with an attitude, and sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. But in general, I think he was a great sportsman and really brought a lot of passion to the court that people really bonded with. The story that I tell in the book that I think is just a great example that is not often followed in sports is one where he was playing in a tournament that he was expected to win. Obviously, in any professional sport, it's difficult to win even if you're the favorite. But he was up in his match pretty significantly and was about to win and was basically serving for the match. And he the other opponent was serving and served once. The ball was out and had another serve. And this, if Roddick won the point, he would win the match. And the ball was served and it was called out. And so everyone assumed that Roddick had won. The umpire and even the other player were ready to concede the match. And Roddick showed no, the ball was in, and we need to replay the point. Whereas he could have just gone with it, and everybody in the stadium, including everybody on the opponent side, would have gone with it and shaken his hand and moved on. But he had integrity. He said no. The call was wrong. The ball was in, and we need to keep playing. And even though he was up by a huge margin, that one point turned the whole match around, and he ended up losing the whole match. And so not only did he, lose a point in a game and in a match, but probably lost many tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars for not advancing and maybe winning the tournament. So it was more than just conceding a point. It was actually ended up being a huge um, impact on him just to have the integrity and the sportsmanship to say, no, I'm going to do what's right. And so I compare that to another example of a lack of sportsmanship or a lack of integrity in sports. But I feel like that one example is a great one of just doing the right thing because it's the right thing. Unconditional, no matter what the circumstances are. Doesn't matter if you're about to win. You make the right call and then you play the game.
Yeah, you do the right thing. After reading the story, I tried to imagine, him back in the hotel after the match and feeling good about his win and the money, but yet, if he didn't come clean, it's kind of like cheating. So it's how do you feel about that? And I think people that can have that integrity and, as you said it well, do the right thing. That's one of the core values we had in my company was do the right thing. And
Right.
sometimes the consequences aren't what you like and they aren't what you expect, and it hurts. But it seems to me that doing the right thing always wins out in the long run.
I think that's the point. Yeah, it's the long run. It's you may achieve something in the short term, and very often that's why we fail at integrity, why we violate our values is we want that short term benefit, but in the long term, it's not beneficial. It hurts us from a personal perspective, and very often it hurts our reputation with others, and that usually comes back to bite us some one time or another. So. Just getting in the habit, and that is making a value like integrity unconditional and making sure that no matter what the circumstances are, this is who I'm going to be. That's going to make a much bigger impact positively in the long run.
I have a personal story about that. That in my company, we had a board of directors meeting one time, and I won't bore you with all the details, but I was in healthcare, and we'd switched billing systems. And when we switched billing systems, we found that we had been overpaid by significantly hundreds of thousands of dollars by these certain insurance companies. And so we tried to do the right thing and say, well, we need to give the money back. So we called insurance companies and say we've been overpaid. We found through our records in this transition. And they were like, well, we don't have systems to reconcile that, so we don't want it back. Just, we don't want it back. So we had, I think it was like $400,000 in our coffers here that we just didn't know what to do with. So, it was easy to say, we tried to do the right thing. We called the insurance companies, whatever, but we're all going to get nice bonuses at the end of the year this year. And we had one board member that stood up and said, but it's not our money. And I said, yeah, but they screw us in other ways. And we find all the ways to justify that we could keep the money.
Right.
And basically he said, look, I think this is so important that if we don't do something with the money, if we put it in our pockets, then we don't have integrity. And he said, and if we decide to do that, I'm going to resign. And we all looked at him like, oh my God, seriously? So we had a really deep discussion. And in the end, we gave that money to charity.
Hmm.
And it was like, it felt good. And, most of us probably already spent the money in our heads, but, we gave it to charity. But it was and we had eventually gave him an award for just standing up for, a high level of integrity and doing the right thing.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And now you all look back and are relieved that he brought that up and challenged everybody to do the right thing. Everybody's, I'm sure, feels much better about how it worked out, and probably it helped you make better decisions later on as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it was in the chapter on love too that I was interested in, and you talk about hate. And I
Mhm.
think in today's world right now, this is something we need to talk about. And, so why do we hate? It's like, is it fear? I think you say fear, insecurity. What is it why is there so much hate in the world right now?
Yeah, it's hate always sounds like such an extreme word, and it's easy for us to convince ourselves that we don't allow hate into our hearts or into our minds, that our feelings for other people, even though they may be um, less than love, that they're not hate, and so it's okay. But what I really try to point out in the chapter is that love is more than just the opposite of hate. Love really requires a humanity, just a sense of humanity among people, and the parts of that make up love in the way that I feel like we should really approach it, um, to make it unconditional, are respect, kindness, and compassion. Respect is that basic level of understanding that everyone is equal. Everyone is born into the same world. They may be in different situations, different cultures, different races, different religions, whatever, but they're people. And because we're human, we deserve respect equally among all of us. And then you get to that next level of kindness, which again is somewhat basic, but it's beyond just recognizing that we're equal, but we deserve to be treated in a way that is kind, and acknowledging that we all deserve, a level of basic kindness among us. And then the final part, compassion, is where you acknowledge that everybody deals with the good and the bad, the joy and the suffering, and when you recognize that another person is suffering, not just seeing it and acknowledging it, but actually trying to act on it and trying to help other people. And those things make up love. And I think that should be unconditional. I really feel like that is a foundational value that we all need to take on. And that unconditional love can be that humanity that we all sometimes lack, that can turn into hate and turn into the divisiveness and things that we're dealing with so often. So that humanity is what I think we need to strive for, and unconditional love, I think, is really where to start.
And I like how you take, love and kind. I think that's a good word because, the way we treat each other makes a difference. And, whether we disagree or things go this way or that way, or we have difference of opinions, being kind does not necessarily mean that you give in and that you're weak, but
Right.
you just, you just have a feeling for people, and I don't know, I love the world. Just be kind. I think that's what we should all put front and center.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just treating people as we want to be treated. I mean, going back to the golden rule, but treating people kindly and having compassion. Again, like you said, doesn't mean that that we are giving in. It doesn't mean that that we all always just tolerate everything, no matter what it is. There's still right and wrong, but we can have that respect and kindness and compassion for people that allow us to operate in a much more humane way and hopefully gets us to the right solutions much more quickly and without as much divisiveness and violence.
Yeah, for sure. One of the values that you talk about, which I think needs a little explanation, because it's not as maybe understood as
Traditional,
well as the others, is endeavor.
right?
You talk about endeavor, one of those core values you talk about, but and that you need a growth mindset to really
Hmm.
appreciate endeavor. So tell us a little bit about what endeavor means and why you included that.
Sure. I really struggled with it as I was trying to finish the book. Is endeavor really a core value? Is it a fundamental value that everyone should have? And I decided that it is because with love, gratitude, integrity, and accountability, we can all live. We can all live lives, but it doesn't necessarily, those things don't necessarily require action. They don't require us to really engage with or interact with the world. We can be monks, we can be ascetics and have those first four values. But if we're really going to interact with the world, live in the world, particularly work in the world, if we're going to act, then endeavor, I think, is really what captures that. And as you said, the key or the piece of endeavor, the goal for endeavor that we're really trying to get out of that value is growth. It's the desire to grow as people, as friends, as parents, as leaders, and endeavor is what leads to that growth. It requires us to start off with a vision and to have a number of other aspects, but it eventually is going to encounter challenges, obstacles, and we have to learn how to overcome or persevere through those obstacles in order to grow. We also have to learn how to fail, and that's a big part of endeavor is learning how to fail, understanding that failure is not what many times we think it is, which is a stopping point and an end point, but rather failure is a stepping stone to growth. And in that growth, personally, is really what we must achieve from endeavor, and that's why I think it's a fundamental value.
And then you also say in the end of that chapter too, which I thought was profound, was that we need endeavor to do all the things that we just described, or the other four, but it brings it all together, so to speak, because we're doing the actions. But it should always be centered in love, going back to what we said about love.
Absolutely, I really believe so much that love is the foundation. Love is the center of all these values and really should be the center of our lives and how we approach the world. But endeavor is kind of how we act, how we do the things that we're going to do in the world, how we achieve the things we're going to achieve. I compare it in the book to like the thumb of your hand, where you can grab onto a rail, but you're not really holding on tight until you wrap that thumb around. And endeavor is what allows us to really hold on and do the things that we set out to do. And it requires failure, it requires perseverance, and it eventually leads to growth, which I think is one of the key aspects of life.
And you also talked about beyond integrity, like beyond integrity is accepting change. We know that change is going to happen. Why is it that the human mind always wants to, let's keep everything the same, and but we all know that change is always coming. And then also, look at life as as not a short game; it's a long game. You've got to look at things, short-term gain is not always the best if you sacrifice something in the long run. And
Right.
then the third part of that too is, don't care what others think, which to me is one of the hardest things, right? We spend
It
too
is.
much time, worrying about if I make this decision or I do this or I do that, what are others going to think?
Right.
Which we all know is probably not healthy, but I think a lot of us do it.
It's so hard. Yeah, it is so hard. And we we often say, those of us who have gotten into our middle age, we often say, you have to become wise before you realize that it doesn't matter what other people think. But even in middle age, it's hard.
Yeah.
You can't help but compare yourself to other people, and you can't help but wonder and often worry about what other people think. So that's why I think thinking of the values as unconditional is so helpful, that if that is really who you are, your values make up who you are, and those are unconditional, then you have to consider what other people think as not important, or at least less important than these unconditional values. You have to live those values no matter what other people think. And that's a much healthier way to go about life, I think.
And you just said, if you live that unconditional value life, a statement that I thought was profound as well is when you said confidentiality or not, or what word am I looking for here? Opposite of unconditional. So
Right.
conditionality, uh, is like it's like it creates dependence, right?
Right.
Because so explain that a little bit. I thought that was an interesting statement.
Yeah, conditionality really means that you're waiting to see how things turn out, or how you think things are going to turn out before you decide how to act. It's making your actions dependent on the situation. So if you're talking about love, it's deciding whether or not you're going to respect someone based on who they are, what they look like, how they act towards you, how you feel about them. If you're talking about integrity, it's waiting to decide if you're going to be honest, by seeing how the situation might work out, and if you're going to win the point in a tennis match, or if you're going to make the money that the insurance company overpaid you on, and then decide how you want to act on it. That's dependent, and that dependence is something that um, pulls the control from you. It pulls the control for how you're going to act, how you're going to behave, and who you're going to be out of your control. And that's a very should be a very uncomfortable place to be. If you can count on how you're going to act, and the value that you're going to maintain no matter the situation, you've got that control, and you're independent of those situations. And that's a power. It really allows you to have control, and it allows other people to see that you're going to be consistent. You're going to be that same person no matter the situation, and they trust you.
I think you said in the book also, you're a father and a lot of us are parents, and the probably the easiest one to understand is that unconditional love we have for a child. They all do things that piss us off. They all do things that disappoint us sometimes or whatever, but it doesn't mean that you stop loving them. And so
Right.
I think that's one of the easier ones to understand about this, you know, unconditional love. I think when you talk a little bit about when you wrote the book, you look back on that time too, and your kids were, getting older and about ready to leave the house, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is a big deal.
Exactly. I mentioned that career pivot when we lost the human landing system project, and I sort of stepped back. It happened right around the same time that my son started his senior year in high school. And that kind of hit me hard, because I had always thought about wanting to write down for my kids things that I think are important. And so having that career pivot, and this realization that I really want to write some things down, I decided to take the time and start writing about what do I think is important? What's really important in life? And it led me to create the book, The Unconditionals, because I do think these five values are um, the center of how we should what we should aim for, what our values should be, and who we should try to be as people. But so much of it came from that desire to impart on my kids those values, and then I realized later that these are important values for me as an adult who are becoming leaders or are experienced leaders, but who are challenged with situations that really are difficult to handle, need to be reminded that these values are fundamental to who we are in every situation. Parents, as parents, as you said, we struggle many times to live those values, even unconditional love. But all situations in life, we need to be reminded that these values really are critical to helping us um, get through those difficult situations and then live fulfilled lives.
So you said earlier that you're 53 years old. You've kind of had this pivot change. What does the rest of your working career look like? Are you still with that company that you were with when you were talking about the human landing system? Are you still with them, or are you going to do something different? So you still got a lot in the tank, I presume. So what's in your future?
Yeah, I do have a lot in the tank, and honestly, the answer is I don't know. I I've done a few things, so I did change companies. At the end of that human landing system, it was such a large project that when it ended, we had to kind of scatter as a team, which was a challenge. But I went and worked and managed another program for a while, and then left and went to a different company. Um, but in the last 9 months or so, I've really been um, focused on trying to see how the unconditional values will impact the next part of my career, whether it leads to kind of a career on its own, which I've been pursuing somewhat, but also, can I pursue it in the context of a continuing aerospace career? So I've dabbled in kind of both of those things, and really, I think in the next few months, I'll make a decision about where I want to focus the next few years. But it's been fun. I've really enjoyed getting to talk about the book, being on podcasts like yours, and talk to great people like you. And every time I do, I learn something. So that's been great and has really helped me understand that I want to make an impact in talking about values and helping future leaders be as positive and impactful as possible. But I also have a lot to do that I want to do myself. So still looking to figure that out.
In anticipation of our discussion today, what haven't I asked you, or what haven't we covered that you want to be sure and cover today?
Yeah, good question. Um, I think we touched on several of the values as we've talked. We haven't talked too much about gratitude or accountability, and maybe I'll just throw in a couple of points there that I think are important. Um, One is with gratitude. It's more than just for what's happened, but it's being present in the moment and recognizing that what we have, whatever situation we're in, what we have is of value, is of value to us in that moment, and we have to make the most of it. So gratitude really gives us an equanimity or a peace or a joy in the way that we live. And I talk in the book about worry and complaint as being things that cause us to struggle with gratitude, but gratitude is so important to how we live life. And then accountability, I think, is one that again many people think about as a value that we should have. But what does that really mean? And in the book, I talk about it. Fundamentally, it means ownership. It means owning what roles we take on in life, whether it's uh, a worker or a father or a brother or a leader, whatever roles we take on, we have to own those roles, and that means many times dealing with failure as much as success. But we have to own that, and the unconditional part of that is, we know things are not going to go well sometimes, but we have to be willing to live with it and deal with the good and the bad and move past it. And that leads us into that part of endeavor and growth that we all need to work on.
Looking over your right shoulder there, since we're on video here, it looks like is that a picture of an astronaut there that, who is that and why is she on your wall?
Yeah, my walls in my man cave here are all covered with space memorabilia. So you're probably talking about Sally Ride, obviously the first American woman in space. Yeah, I've got, you can see, if I shift over, you can see
Oh yeah, yeah.
other ones. I have behind me a couple of uh, photos that are autographed by both American and Soviet cosmonauts, American astronauts and Soviet cosmonauts, which is really cool when we did cooperate back in the Soyuz program
Mhm.
after Apollo, and then in one place there's a little card with one of John F. Kennedy's key speeches on space that actually the card flew to space
Mhm.
in one of the missions. So I've got a few artifacts in here that have flown to space. But yeah, I've collected a lot of space things. I'm a space geek, clearly, and it reminds me, sort of inspires me to see these things in the man cave.
That's great. Well, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question. And that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Something that I have learned more, I think, in the past few years, writing the book, thinking about it as part of the process of writing the book, and thinking about the things that sparked me to write the book, and then just really understanding the concepts much better, is how important failure is. Um, that failure is not something to be feared. Failure is something to be welcomed. Failure is really a prerequisite for success. And that's not something that we embrace in our culture. It's not something, particularly American culture, it's not something that we celebrate. We really should be celebrating failures because those are the things that teach us how to be successful. And, I've certainly learned more in the past several years about how many of the world's the people who have been considered most successful throughout history, how much they failed, how much they learned from their failure and failed so many times before they finally achieved success, or what is seen as success. So reframing failure as an opportunity to learn is so critical for us as people, as leaders, and is something that we need to continue to weave into our culture so that we understand that better.
That is really well said. We've said many, many times on this program that, we can all agree that we learn more from our failures than our successes. Yet everyone tries to not fail. It's right, I mean, it's just so ingrained in us that the way that you said it, I thought was well done because, we need to celebrate it in a way, not to say that we screwed up and, things didn't work out, but what did we learn from it and how can that help us go on into the future? So,
Yeah, yeah, it's very hard. You don't hear it very often, but I think it was Sarah Blakely who's the CEO of Spanx, the clothing brand Spanx, and I think she was the one who said her father asked her at the dinner table very frequently, "Where did you fail today?" And that's a very forward-thinking, very wise father to ask that kind of question. Not enough of us think that way, and I think that does. If we can weave that into our minds and our culture, it will help us to really succeed more because we've learned how to fail.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, Andy, this has been great having you on. As you said earlier, the reason you do these podcasts and the reason I do podcasts because you learn something every time and learn a lot from you today. And I love the idea because we often get in these things. Well, engineers and highly scientific people and whatever, they don't need to have these people skills and these things because they're just doing all the technical work. But I would agree with you. I think it's people that do things and how you treat people and how you interact with people and the teamwork with people. always wins out, no matter what the level of talent you have. So I think the book is well done. I like that you wrote it because you came from that other side and now pushing the people side, and to me that really makes a lot of sense. So nice job on the book. It's well done.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. You got a great podcast, and so it's an honor to be on.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Well, Happy New Year. We're doing this right after the first of the year, although it'll be published a little bit down the road. But Happy New Year, and I wish you all the best. And again, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks to you.
Take care, and maybe we'll meet down the road one of these
I
days.
hope so. Thanks,
Okay.
Steve.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.